Every church planter says their city is the most unchurched city in America.
People are so unchurched in Seattle that sometimes I would say, I'm a pastor when they ask me what I do. And they would say, what is a pastor?
What was it like with the LGBT community?
The number one question we were asked, are you open and affirming? What are your beliefs on sexuality? They don't really ask about any other parts of theology. I asked pastors, how do you respond when people ask you about this issue? The majority of people said, do not acknowledge it, don't make a statement, don't preach on it. I advise young church planters, make a statement, preach the message, do the hard work of figuring out what you believe early on in your church life. Otherwise, you're going to be afraid if people find out what you really believe.
Welcome to the ChurchCandy podcast. Today, I'm sitting down with my friend and probably one of the first 20 churches to ever sign up for ChurchCandy, Pastor Pradeepan Jeeva from Kalos Church, all the way right outside of Seattle, Washington. Man, thank you for taking the trip down here.
I'm pumped to be here, and I'm pumped to be one of the OG ChurchCandy clients.
Dude, you were an OG. You and I have been connected on social media for a while,
Yeah.
but I love that we get to partner with Kalos and help you guys with everything you do. But man, I want to jump in and just want you to have an opportunity to share your story and talk about what made you want to plant a church to begin with.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my full name, for those of you who don't know or are listening, is Pradeepan Jeeva, which is not a Norwegian name, despite popular belief. It's actually a Sri Lankan name. So my family is from Sri Lanka, this small island south of India, and they lived through a civil war, which is really intense, so much death, destruction, and they had to escape, and they ended up immigrating to America as refugees, and they had to start over. So they went from tropical island paradise to Minnesota in the wintertime.
Complete opposite
Yeah, exactly.
climates.
And yeah, crazy. They were Hindus at the time, but couldn't find a temple to worship at. Didn't speak English very well. Friends, family, all gone. Mixed in with the trauma of war, they decided we can't live anymore. So they decided, this was before I was born, they decided we're going to end our lives as a family. So my mom, my dad, my sister went to a bridge in Minneapolis and said, we're going to jump off of this. As they were thinking and processing this plan, actually a random pastor, a Norwegian Lutheran pastor, saw them and said, you don't have to do that, stop that. In fact, why don't you come live with me and my wife, our sons, and our trailer home? And so just he took in this strange brown family from off the street into his home and shared Christian hospitality, the love of the gospel. And my family in that environment decided we don't want to end our lives. In fact, we want to create a new life. And they got pregnant with me. And so actually, my mom has told me I was conceived on the couch of that trailer home living room. Glory to God.
Glory to God that I don't know the story of my conception. You have a way more beautiful story than I would imagine my parents' conception story is.
Look them in the eye if you have the opportunity.
We'll
Ask
see.
them,
Maybe
was I conceived?
Maybe one day. Maybe one day. It's funny. My brother right now is engineering the podcast,
Yes.
doing live video switching, so he's probably getting uncomfortable just listening to us talk about this.
I'm confident he knows the full story of how you.
I'm sure
was
he doesn't.
conceived.
He's actually my younger brother,
Okay.
like significantly younger brother, but he eats way more protein than me, I guess. And
That's amazing.
yeah, built like a middle linebacker. But
That's crazy. So yeah, that's my family story, coming to America, experiencing Christianity for the first time. And so one of the reasons I wanted to be a pastor was I wanted to reach people who are in situations like my family was.
yeah,
Because my testimony of encountering the love of God began before I was even alive. I mean, the only reason I'm alive is because some pastor reached out to a stranger to say, let me show you a more beautiful way. Let me show you that there's a reason to have hope. And he could have justified, oh, I don't want to bother them, or I can't do anything. It's not my place. But I'm so thankful that instead of just walking by, he chose to sit with my family, and I'm alive today. And I want to be that kind of pastor. I want to go after people who are not going to just stumble in my church, I want to go after people who don't know where to find hope. And I want to say, hey, let me show you hospitality. Let me make an invite. And so, like, my definition of ministry is basically I freely receive, I freely give,
Yeah.
you know,
It,
and I'm thankful.
that's awesome, man. And so throughout that time growing up in Minnesota, I'm assuming you grew up in church. When did you know that, like, all right, God, I think you are calling me to be a pastor. I think you are calling me to go into
Yeah.
ministry.
So I kind of grew up in church. Like, my earliest memories were in this Lutheran church building. So we got out of the trailer home, and then I lived in the Lutheran parsonage that was connected to the church building. So my youngest memories running around pews.
So literally grew up in church.
Yeah, literally. But then as my family were able to live the American dream, got jobs and things like that, they built their own house and stopped going to church completely.
Mm.
And so, like, in my actual memory of my upbringing and my values, I actually didn't know the gospel. I knew that the church helped us way back then, but I wasn't part of church. I wasn't part of understanding the scriptures for myself. My family, as they lived the American dream, actually ended up getting a divorce, and things were getting pretty desperate. I was in a world of trouble, getting in just so many fights, getting arrested, going through like a violent time in my life as my family was split up. My dad was working, mom was kind of out of the picture. So I was by myself a lot. And so got in a lot of trouble. But then there's this random girl, Amy DeVanzo in Minnesota, where I was, and she invited me to church. And I was like an awkward kid. You know, I wasn't quite fully Sri Lankan, wasn't quite fully American to understand all the puns and the jokes and the cultural context for everything. And so I was thankful for any time someone wanted to do anything with me outside of school. So here is this beautiful girl who says, "Do you want to go to church with me?" And I'm like, I'm an awkward kid. Literally, I was so awkward. I had a mustache when I was in middle school, but it wasn't made out of hair. It was made out of chapped lips. Like,
Oh
I
my
was that
gosh.
kid. So here's this beautiful girl, Amy DeManzo. Can you believe it? And she invites me to hang out with her outside of school. And I'm like, listen, Amy, I'll go anywhere with you. Just take me. And so she brought me to a youth church. There's all these people, again, just an invitation, someone going out of their way to make room for me. I go to this church, are all these beautiful girls that are greeting me. And they're like, "Hey, we're so glad you're here." I'm like, what the heck? Beautiful girls never talk to me. I'm glad I'm here. Church is amazing. And I hear the music and the message. I'm just like, I love it. It's crazy. I was only invited, like, as my own person, I was only invited to church one time. And it changed my life forever. I'm a pastor today because of that one invitation. So I went and I heard the gospel, and I decided to follow Jesus, and felt a call to ministry in that youth ministry in Minnesota. Started trying to reach all my friends to Christ in school. I was like that weird kid. I would jump up on lunch tables in the cafeteria and preach the gospel. I would go to movie theaters with my friends. We were just kind of crazy. We would just interrupt the trailers and preach the gospel. Everybody's annoyed, but sometimes people get saved.
Yeah.
Our ministry strategies changed a lot since then, but that's kind of like my call to the church. And then there's a moment at a church camp where I just felt like the Holy Spirit say, like, would you give your life to preach the gospel to those who don't know the gospel? And so I said, I'm in, and made the decision to go to Bible school to study ministry.
Yeah. And then what brought you to Seattle and Bellevue?
Yeah, so that's crazy. I was a youth and young adults pastor in Michigan. And sadly, my wife and I, we got pregnant for the first time, and that ended up in a miscarriage. And we were just devastated. And I honestly was looking for a way to cope. So I just started fasting. I didn't have a grand plan or anything. It wasn't because I'm a spiritual giant or super strong. I just started fasting as a way to maybe control or cope or something. And that ended up being a 40-day fast. No food, just water, lost a ton of weight. Everybody's telling my wife to convince me to eat again, you know. And during that time, I am praying, and I feel like the Holy Spirit, again, whispers to me, Pradeepan, you're struggling to build your physical family. Would you consider starting a spiritual family? I want you to start a beautiful church in a beautiful place. So it's actually where the word Kalos for Kalos Church comes from. That means beautiful in poorly pronounced Greek. And so we're like, all right, beautiful church, beautiful place. Obviously, that's going to be Florida. I was living in Michigan at the time. So we go scout out Florida. We're like, Lord, we'll drink Mai Tais on the beach for your glory. Like,
Amen.
who will do this for your kingdom? We will go. But we got there, didn't feel right in our discernment. So we prayed and fasted again. Literally had a dream in the middle of the night where I felt like the Lord was saying, plant a church in this place called Bellevue. So I wake up my wife and I say, hey, I think the Lord spoke, not exactly sure. And she goes, well, let's do something really spiritual. Let's Google map Bellevue. And so lo and behold, it's outside of Seattle. Like, we don't know Seattle. We're Midwest people. My wife's from Kansas, and we're looking at house prices. It's crazy. We literally looked at a house to buy in Michigan for $6,000. And that's like our bubble tea budget in Seattle now. It's so much more expensive. Like, the two richest people on earth at the time lived there, like Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we followed a call. It wasn't a marketing study. It wasn't a grand plan. It was just a dream while praying and fasting from the Lord. And we said, we'll go.
Yeah.
It was crazy.
So tell me about the early days. You guys move and basically you guys parachute in there. Did people move with you? Did you have any connections there?
We did parachute in there. We didn't know really anybody. We had about 9 to 12 people come out with Michigan from us eventually, 3 months after we moved there. And it was wild. We didn't know anybody. Like, our first interest meeting to kind of say, hey, we're interested in starting a church. Would you want to help us in a coffee shop? Had 3 people. So it was totally from scratch. Second meeting, 5 people. Third meeting, 65 people. And by some miracle, at that backyard barbecue we hosted at our house was 65 people, and 34 people decided they would help us start the church just from that. And so then we got some kind of momentum, critical mass, and then we launched in September 17, 2017 as Arc Church Plant 700. We had 234 people come. And that was the start, but we didn't know anybody. It was all strangers. It was all like gathering, interest in parks. Hey, you want to help us start a church? We didn't have ChurchCandy back then. So it was like, we would just creepily walk up to people. Sometimes I'd intentionally lose my kid in the park, and then someone would return him to me. And I'd say, oh, thank you for returning my son.
While you're here.
Yeah, exactly. Let me take you to coffee to repay you and talk to you. Or, we'd do like surveys in the malls and say like, what kind of church would you attend if you ever went to a church? And nobody wanted to talk to me. It was just rejection after rejection. It was the worst form of marketing.
Yeah.
I'm thankful for a better way now.
Yeah, right. Right. What was a lot of the response? Because, Seattle, which I know every church planter says their city is the most unchurched city in America. But whenever you think of, okay, where would that be? Without looking at any data or stats, I would say, I think Seattle would be up there for sure.
Yes.
I know there's stats, confirming that the Pacific Northwest in general is a very unchurched area compared to where we are now in the South in Houston. So what was the response like? What kind of pushback did you get from people?
People are so unchurched in Seattle that sometimes I would say, I'm a pastor, when they ask me what I do. And they would say, what is a pastor? And it's a majority minority city. You have so many immigrants, people from all over the world coming to work for like Amazon or Microsoft. And so coming from different religious backgrounds, not super familiar with Christianity, some of them very hostile towards the gospel. Like, we don't like that. We don't like your values. Most just unaware. And then you had some pretty high profile churches that got big and then collapsed. And so then we had what we called Christian refugees, because they were part of church, they loved their church, and then suddenly it disappeared. There's like 4 or 5 of those stories in Seattle area. And so, you had a mixed response. I had people say, I hope you fail. I don't believe in the local church because of their church hurt. Other people, what is Christianity? Other people kind of associate Christianity with a certain political party. And so Seattle wasn't in favor for that. And so, a little hostility, I would say.
Yeah. And with that, I know it maybe now a lot more than back in 2017. But what was it like with like the LGBT community? Or, I've talked with church planters, and they're like, typically that's like the first question that people ask whenever they're sitting down asking questions about the church.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a big question. And it's even been a wild journey with some of my planters friends. I had a friend planting the week after us in Portland, and he got a theater to plant in, and they had their mailers and their advertisements. They had their launch team. They're about to plant, and it was this like theater in the arts district. The community found out there's a church going to be in this arts theater, and so they protested. And the night before, they called the owner and they said, "Hey, if you allow a church to meet here, we're never gonna be going to your theater again. You're gonna lose most of your business."
Wow.
So the night before their launch, the owner said, "Sorry, I know we have a contract. I know I shook your hand, but I'm gonna lose my business because people found out some of your values on sexual ethics. You're more traditional, conservative with your Christian values around marriage and homosexuality, things like that." And so you can sue me, but I'll probably lose more money if, I work with you than if you sue me. So I'm just saying, church, you can't meet here. We're padlocking the doors, and we're going to put some people outside the building so you can't use it. So they had to scramble. So that was a similar environment. We didn't have that personal story, but there are a lot of people who are not happy with the idea of a church because of sexual values. And so I would say the number one question we were asked when we were planted, even today when we get emails or people want to know about the church, is they ask, "Are you open and affirming? What are your beliefs on, sexuality?" They don't really ask about like any other parts of theology. So it's a big issue. It's a big part of the identity and the culture of the area. People don't want to fall in love with the church if they don't know like where you stand on this issue. So there are different websites like Church Clarity that I think came out of Seattle, where they like find out what churches believe on sexuality and they post it on a website. So churches that try to say like, we're not going to make a stance, everything's going to be a conversation. There's just like, all right, then we're just going to say that you are not affirming to homosexuality, and we're just going to make it very clear for the whole world for you. So that was kind of the environment. Yeah, people ask that question a lot. And we just had to be really clear on what we believed right off from the bat. So it probably prevented some of our growth with some people, but probably kept some of the other people who are more conservative willing to come to our church as well.
Yeah, you preached on this recently, and I listened to the message. I thought you put it out there fantastic as far as, communicating like grace but truth at the same time. What advice would you give to church planters whenever it comes to dealing with like the LGBT issue and getting pushback from people on that?
Yeah, I advise young church planters, make a statement, like preach the message, do the hard work of figuring out what you believe early on in your church life, because otherwise you're going to be afraid if people find out what you really believe.
Yeah.
And you're going to have people who are serving in your church, becoming pillars of your church, and it's kind of like an don't ask, don't tell environment. And then people assume your beliefs. So like the loudest voices in your church start shaping the theology and the culture and the vision of your church because you're silent on it as a pastor. And so in that vacuum, it's filled with maybe ideas and theologies you don't believe in, or you wouldn't have phrased it that way, or maybe it's a little too soft or it's too aggressive. And so I would just say have the awkward conversations early on in your church's life. Like, what do you believe about women elders and preachers? What do you believe about homosexuality and marriage? What do you believe about racism? Like, lose the people up front that you're going to offend rather than after you've developed a life and a relationship with them and they've shaped the culture and have sown into your church and you've sown into them. And then it becomes a divisive point. So have those awkward, heartbreaking moments. I know in the first year, you're just trying to gather. But I'm telling you, if you build right with a better foundation, you could avoid a lot of heartache. So when we moved to the city, I asked pastors, like, how do you respond when people ask you about this issue? And I would say the majority of people said, do not acknowledge it. Don't make a statement. Don't put anything on your website. Don't preach on it. And I kind of did that. I mean, in private, I would say we're an open church. Everybody's welcome. You can serve. You can worship with us. But we're not an affirming church. I'm not going to open up the Bible and say Jesus affirms every sexual ethic, because I don't think Jesus says just because you desire something, if you were born with the desire, I don't think he justifies rape. Or if you have consent, I don't think Jesus would justify incest. So we see that there are sexual standards that even if you don't believe in the Bible, you believe as a society. Most people don't condone incest or rape. So consent and desire do not justify all sexual activity. So what are those values? What do you have based on the Bible? Make that very clear in your early days. Because listen, being a church planter is a lot like being a referee. You're going to make a call, you know, and no matter if that call is good or right or accurate, half the people in the crowd are going to be upset with a call if it doesn't line up with their benefit.
Yeah.
So you got to make a call regardless. And we really learned that in 2020 because everybody was offended. There were riots and protests all around. And I realized, man, people don't like me unless I'm regurgitating exactly what they want when they want. Even silence is offensive. You have to not take time to think. You have to be reactionary or people are against you, specifically in 2020. And so on the other side, I was like, listen, we're going to lose people in the church regardless of what I say, even if they agree with me. So we might as well preach and teach and form a culture for a church that we actually like and believe in, and we have a clear conscience before the Lord that we're preaching the full truth of God's word.
Yeah.
So that'd be what I would say to church planners.
Yeah, that's really good. For you guys, what was the pandemic like? Everything from the cultural issues we were going through as a country to logistically meeting in person and things like that.
It was an absolute nightmare. It was 58 weeks online for us. The first COVID case was right down the street from us in a hospital in Kirkland. And I remember just like we had just built critical mass in our church. We had hit 500 for the first time. And then we go online 58 weeks, and people are offended over politics, over racism, over masks, over gathering. You just could not make anybody happy. And then even when things were opening up, like no hotels or movie theaters or even other churches would let us gather because we didn't have our own building. And so we were just like scrapping to meet wherever we could meet. I feel like though that it hardened a resilience, like grit. It made me understand what we believe as a church and the kind of culture I want. And so it was a refining time. It was like, I don't know, like I think like 5-star generals or something. I'm not a military expert, but they can only be made in times of war. Is that true? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I know what you're referring to.
Yeah.
We'll say it's true. Don't fact check us.
Yes. There's some sort of general that can only be distinguished in a time of war. And so I feel like those of us who are in ministry in 2020, we have like some crazy war stories and scars that you're not going to be able to learn in seminary or just a normal church life. And people are going to be like, how do you have this perspective? Be like, it was earned through tears and lament and pain and just enduring through it. But sadly, like there were church plants in Bellevue before us, and pretty much all of them closed in 2020. I think maybe all of the church plants that existed before us and after us have closed down in this time.
Wow.
So as far as like people who call themselves church plants, I don't think there are any right now in Bellevue, Washington. Other people have moved out or they've closed their doors. And so it really took a toll on the city. And so we're praying for more church planters and pastors to rise up and be encouraged and feel the call of God in their life to go there. But
time for you guys to launch another campus.
Yeah. That'd be the dream.
Awesome, man. I want to take it back a little bit before 2020, your first year of church planting. A lot of church planters say, I didn't know what I didn't know.
Yeah.
Right. And I know your story specifically, like you guys went through some really challenging times. Speak on that a little bit.
Everybody said, when you plant a church, get ready for spiritual warfare. And I was like, yeah, I've been in ministry. Like, I know what it's like to have grit and endure. But something like unlocked as far as like spiritual warfare when we began. It was like, we've been in ministry for years, but in that first year, like my wife's father suddenly passed away. Then my stepdad, who was a pastor, suddenly passed away. My sister, who was living in India at the time, got dengue fever and went blind during that season. And then, like, more divorces in my family. I mean, it was just bang, bang, bang. And then the worst, intense, most part of it was when my son, who was typically developing, was about 2 years old, was speaking to us, playing catch with us, walking with us, suddenly began to lose his ability to speak, make eye contact, play catch, all of these things. And it turns out he had regressive autism. And so we had to figure out how are we going to manage this, and all our dreams of what it's like to interact with your kid and the relationship we had suddenly had to change. And it wasn't like we had this quirky kid where we're judging people with autism. It was like, no, we had a son that we loved. And then suddenly his personality and everything we had developed and shared together disappeared. I can't even talk to him or do the things that we used to do. And so that was all in the first year of church planting. So, like, moving to a new city, planting a church, like, the church planting part was actually, not the most difficult part. It was like that reality of the pain in our own family. And then as we were entering 2020, our daughter started going through the same thing, like, not talking, not interacting with us. And so we were just like, man, this Lord, like, do whatever you want with the church, but, like, protect our family.
Yeah.
This is a nightmare. So I honestly, I went through like a mental breakdown. I told the board, I don't know if I can be a husband anymore, a father anymore, definitely not a pastor. Like, I don't know if I'm the person for this anymore. Thankfully, they had the, wisdom to not give into my shock and my pain, and, help me process through lament, and paid for us to have some vacations and get away and bring in some guest speakers and endure. They just said, we believe you and Amrita are still the right people to pass through this church. Even if you're a special needs family and you're going through a dark night of the soul, so we're going to get you the support. So we began counseling twice a week with a spirit-filled counselor, and working on our marriage, and all of that. But it was brutal. So if you're like, I don't know, if you're going into your first year of church planting, don't be naive to spiritual warfare. Don't be ignorant, and develop an intercessory prayer team to just cover you. People that you can share, like, what you're going through or updates. Build a relationship with a professional Christian godly counselor before you need it. You don't want to have to build that foundation in the trial and the panic. You want to have that foundation before it happens. But yeah, that was our first year. That was just on top of, like, trying to figure out a new city, the most unchurched city in America, and plant a church.
Yeah. So throughout all of that, from death in your family, sister going blind, divorces in your family, both of your kids throughout, I mean, started with your son and then your daughter, going through, what did you call it? Regressive autism.
Yeah, that's what the doctor is calling it.
And so throughout all of that, I mean, that's got to be tough.
Yeah.
And I know it's hard as a pastor. Your community, day to day, it's your congregation, that people that you are pastoring.
Yeah.
And it's this weird, like, it's hard to bring all of your dirty laundry and the things you're going through
Yeah.
to people that you're pastoring,
Yeah.
right? And so what was that like for you? How did you have people to lean on? I know you mentioned counseling, but
Yeah.
what was that season like for you?
We made a decision that we didn't just want to lead this church. We wanted to be part of this church. Because honestly, the goal of advancing God's kingdom is way more important than our role. Like,
Yep.
I'm not going to be a lead pastor forever. In fact, every pastor is an interim pastor. We're temporary. This didn't start with us. It won't end with us. We're building God's kingdom, not our own. We're all interim pastors. And so we wanted to lead in a way that, like, if we're not the lead pastors, we can still worship and fellowship and interact with the people of the church. So that required us to be in a mature and responsible way, a little bit vulnerable. And, that isn't something everybody's comfortable with. But, I love this quote by Craig Rochelle that says that people are inspired by your strengths, but they connect with your weaknesses. And so as we just said, hey, church, we are going to lead. We're still believing God for breakthrough, but we are weak, and we're wounded healers right now. We're leading with a limp, and we need you to pray for us and support us and see our humanity. And honestly, you'd think people would lose respect for us, or maybe that's the fear pastors have. If they see like my frailty, they'll lose respect. But it's the opposite. They say,
Yeah.
like, wow, thank you for trusting us. All right, Pastor, we're gonna pray for you. We're gonna help you. We're gonna believe that we can receive grace from God. All of us. It's not by our own strength or our own courage. It's like we just throw ourselves at the feet of Jesus, lay ourselves before the cross, and say, Jesus, I'm the first in a long line of people just looking for bread. And, I can truly say, follow me as I follow Christ. God, I need mercy. I need grace. I need help. And church, would you follow us as we just go first to Jesus? We have never been the source. It's never been about us. And honestly, I'm really, really thankful for our church, our team, our staff, because they really carried us. I mean, they saw us when we were depressed and sad and cried. Obviously, we didn't try to like use the pulpit to vent or be free therapy.
Yeah.
We weren't trying to bleed on the people, but we still showed them our wounds just like Jesus did with Thomas. Like we are human, we bleed, we have pain, we have sorrow. We got to demonstrate firsthand what it means to lament, and our church really rose to the occasion and loved us and were patient with us. I remember sometimes even in staff meetings, my wife Amrita, she co-pastors with me. She said, "Hey staff, like, are we just too sad all the time?" And we actually cope with humor and jokes and stuff like
Yeah.
that. So they're actually like, no, thank you for actually letting us see your sadness and not just like hiding it with your smile or jokes. Thank you for being real. It gives us the freedom to feel like we can be real as well and experience like God is someone who's close to the brokenhearted. So I'm really proud of our church for loving us through that season. We needed it. And even the local church community, other pastors paid for our vacations and cried with us and laughed with us. We really saw like our church isn't the main thing. We're just part of a greater kingdom ecosystem in Seattle. So I'm really thankful for all of the churches and pastors that rallied around us in a significant way.
Yeah. Man, that's beautiful to hear. Looking at where you guys are now versus in 2020, met online for, what did you say, 58 weeks?
Yeah.
Then you went back to being portable. And then I know a couple years ago, you guys got a new building. What was that process like? Getting traction up again. I know that's around the season whenever you and I started working together. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, we feel like we have launched two churches. So we launched in 2017, hit 500 for the first time, 58 weeks online. And then our first service back in 2021 was 38 people. And we were like, that's our launch team size.
Yeah.
And I had been doing a lot of the ads, for our launch myself, like in the original launch, 2017, mailers and following up with the Facebook algorithms. And that's when we first interacted because we would like swap notes on what do
Yeah.
you think is happening with the algorithms? What is the strategy? Meeting with people from Facebook, learning all of that stuff. But then as we relaunched, I was like, I'm going through personal issues in my family. This is destroying people left and right. I just need to be able to focus on prayer, the word, building a culture again. I can't keep up with all the algorithms. And so actually that's when I reached out to you and I was so thankful because you were launching a company that could keep up with all the trends so that I could focus more on prayer and the word and still reach people. And so we felt like we were relaunching again. And so 38 people back at the first service. And this was like, we had to get everybody's contact information to go into the hotel, like by law, like masks. They had to show vaccine cards, like the hotel security was doing all of that. And we had to have like 30% capacity. And I was still like recording videos. So in our live gathering, we would watch a video and do awkward worship. And everybody's feeling weird and separated. It was the worst. But we started going again and again. And finally, things started to grow a little bit, but we weren't hardly making a dent in compared to the numbers we had pre-COVID. Then we just really leaned into ChurchCandy and the ads, and then we had our first Easter, and over 400 people came to that Easter service. Now, like I think in Seattle proper, I don't know if there's any church that was like above 1,000 people. So to come back from 38 to 400 in the most unchurched city in America, like with these ads and just praying and believing, it was like a miracle to us. It was like an outpouring of God's grace for us. But at that Easter service with over 400 people in 2021, here's the crazy thing. We had 38 salvations.
Wow.
The same amount that was at our first service back, which was just like,
Look at God.
yeah, you're with us. All right. You're not done with this church.
That's
Praise
so
the Lord.
cool. That's so cool, man. And then you guys finding your new building. I know a lot of church planters. They're doing load in, load out.
Yeah.
You guys launched in a comedy club.
That's right.
With that, how did you guys find this place? Tell me about it, because I know there's a lot of church planters that are ready to stop having to show up at their church building at 5:30 a.m. for load in, load out, right?
Yeah, not everybody, but a lot of people say building is not a big deal. You lose the camaraderie of set up and tear down. Buildings can be overrated, which I would say, no, they're not overrated. It is a blessing. God created places before he created people.
That's what church planter coaches say to make people, their church planters that they're coaching, feel better. But yeah, I'm right there with you.
You got to get a building as soon as possible. There are givers and worshipers who are kind of watching you. And as soon as you get a building, they're like, oh, you're a real church. We trust you. You're planted. You're rooted. And so now that you have a building, we'll help you. And we're like, actually, we needed so much help before we had the building. Now you're coming that we're in the promised land. I'm not going to be offended at you. But yeah, the week we signed the lease for this long-term lease of this building, we had been in 7 venues 7 weeks in a row.
Wow.
That was the climate. Nobody wanted to.
You were doing pop-up churches before that was like a thing.
Yes.
And like a trend now.
We were telling people on Sundays, hey, so excited to see you next week somewhere. We don't know where, but
we'll send out an email.
Yeah. We don't walk by sight. We walk by faith. And we finally found this random 80s low ceiling office building that had never been used for church services, but it had parking. It was in Bellevue. We felt a conviction to be in Bellevue. It shared a wall with a Hindu temple. On the other side was a mosque, and we share a parking lot with a Tesla dealership. So it's like a little taste of America. In fact, sometimes people assume because I'm brown that I'm the leader of the Hindu temple, and they'll say, "Oh, pastor," or not pastor. "Oh, sir, can you bless me?" Thinking I'm a Hindu priest, and I'll say, "Oh, yes, just walk into this baptismal tank. Let me bless you. Just confess Jesus is Lord." No, I'm just kidding, but. It was just amazing. Like, we were going to all the websites, all the ads, Craigslist, walking around, just finding any building. And so, like, where we're at is really expensive. So, like, a church down the street, they were leasing a building, and their price point was $150,000 a month. And that was like a miracle price for them. Remember, the 2 richest people on earth at the time lived in Bellevue.
Yeah.
So Bellevue is only about 150,000 people, but you have Microsoft and Amazon and Costco and Expedia and T-Mobile all there, so it's pretty wealthy, and so the real estate affects that reality. It reflects that reality quite a bit. And so we were just meeting with realtors and looking around and praying, and finally someone said, hey, you could try this office building. Let's see it. It's so small, 6,800 square feet total, like but it had parking, and it was in an area that we could use. So we just like kind of made it work. It's not the most beautiful building. I mean, we're stewarding it. We're trying to make it better every month. But as soon as we got there, like our attendance started to go up, and we had like a resting place, a place where we could pray and have random meetings and have a little bit more security to launch youth ministries and things like that. And so it's just become like a well of prayer where people know, like, we're going to be there every Sunday and throughout the week. You can come and we'll host you. And well, it's not the most beautiful building. I don't think people are coming for that. And in an area that is so rich, I think sometimes people are refreshed by like dirty, authentic community. Not that our building is dirty. We keep it clean and try to have an excellent spirit, but it's not like some of these buildings I've seen here in Texas.
Yeah.
Yeah,
real estate here is a lot cheaper. I'm sure my house would be like multi-million dollars in Bellevue.
100%.
Yeah. So, with that, you're in the building. What's how many seats can you guys fit in there? And are you at multiple services right now?
Yeah, so we do 3 services on a normal Sunday, 4 services for like Easter, Christmas.
Yeah.
And so like for an Easter we'll have like 1,200 people in there, and we just have figured out to finagle every seat. We got the smallest chairs that you can find online. So not comfy, no armrests. I mean, everybody's shoulder to shoulder. We're wrapped around the stage. There's not a huge altar. We're squished in there. Like all the floor space is accounted for. And then like our lobby is also a kid's space, and we use portable walls in there. So we still have a little bit of a portable mentality. We're flipping for the youth ministry, all of that kind of stuff. But it's crazy. You can pack people in there, and I will say it feels like it's happening. When you have a big building that's empty, the energy is sapped out of the room. But when you have a small room where you can't find a seat and everybody's worshiping, you can hear all their voices. It's fun.
Yeah.
It feels like a movement.
Yeah, I love that, man. I love that. I'm glad that we've been able to help you get connected with more people in Bellevue.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit. What have your results been like working with ChurchCandy?
Yeah, it's been great. In fact, we have these ads running out all the time, selfie videos, just invites. And I'm so thankful that you guys have helped us invite people because, like, remember, my family was invited to a house and I'm alive because of that. Remember, when I was a high schooler, one girl, Amy DeVanzo, invited me to church, and now I'm a pastor. I was only invited to church one time, and my whole life changed forever. And now through Church Candy, we're inviting thousands of people every day to experience the love of God. And people are responding. And we do this thing called Meet the Pastors after every Sunday service. So we want to meet people. Like our statement is we don't want to just be a friendly church, but a church of friends. And so we want to be the kind of pastor you can meet. And so after services, we go into the small room and we ask people, like, how'd you end up at Kalos? Like, what's your story? And oftentimes people are crying. I've never been to a church, but I'm so desperate. Or I grew up in church, but I wandered away. Or I was so church hurt, and this is my first time coming back, and I'm taking a chance, And we're just like so honored to steward those stories. But we'll ask them, well, how did you specifically find Kalos? And they'll say, well, we saw your Facebook ads, or we saw something on Instagram. And I saw it once and twice and 3 times. And finally, I felt like God was speaking to me through these ads. So I decided to show up. And it helped me see your website and your live stream. And I saw that ad, and then I went on the live stream for 6 months. There are some people who literally watched like 4 years worth of sermons before they come to their first Sunday. And they feel like they had to binge watch the show before they could catch up.
You got to
with the
catch
live.
up to the live. Yeah, that's funny.
But it's crazy. Like by the time people come to Kalos Church because of Church Candy, we often hear people say, I've been seeing you everywhere. And I feel like God is compelling me to his house. And we know we serve a Father who desires that his house is full. I feel like Church Candy is helping us be witnesses so people can see and witness for themselves the lives that are being changed in the house of God. And so I think a couple months, maybe 2 months ago, I went to like a UPS, postage store. And the cashier said, hey, are you the person on those ads? You're always inviting me into church. And then this Muslim lady behind me, she said, yeah, I see you everywhere. Can I come to your church? And then another customer said, yeah, I want to come to your church too. And they're like, you're a celebrity. I'm like, no, I'm not a celebrity. I'm a pastor through these ads inviting people to church. But it was like a moment where this whole store was talking about like an invitation to church. Like, where else does that happen? Like, how can that happen? I know so many people are discouraged with evangelism. Like, how do I reach people to Christ? And they're like not wanting to offend people. But, with Church Candy, you can invite a lot of people, but you may annoy people, but eventually they feel like God's knocking on their heart, but they're not going to be terribly offended, unless they're a Christian that knows church and they just don't like it.
Yeah.
But non-Christians, they're not going to be offended.
And then you just hit the block button, and it's not for them. You keep doing what you're doing. I love that, man. Well, I want to thank you for taking time to come on the podcast. At the end of these episodes, sometimes what I like to do is ask you specific questions about Kalos
Yeah.
that we can actually clip and use them in Kalos's ads.
Totally.
So people see that celebrity pastor that they're always seeing on their Instagram, right?
Yeah.
So I'll just ask you something like, tell me about your church in Bellevue. And that'll be like the beginning of the clip. And then your response is basically you tell me about the church.
Okay.
And we want people to see this and be like, oh, I want to check this church out.
Awesome.
So, all right. Man, tell me about your church in Bellevue.
Our church is a diverse congregation that is just passionate about making known the beauty of Jesus. We have like great music where we're all singing together. We're trying to study the word in a way, like the word of God, the Bible, in a way that actually makes sense while not ignoring the hard issues of life. So if you want to talk about sexuality, or if you want to talk about violence in the Bible, or things that you are like, I don't know if I like this, or I have a hard time understanding this, well, we're wrestling through these things as well. So come wrestle with us. And if you're just like lonely or looking for friends, we actually want to meet you. Like, it's hard to make friends in Seattle sometimes. So come join us. Like, let's study the Bible together, no matter what you believe. And let's like work on creating an environment where friendships are possible. That's like what we're passionate about. So we'd love to have you.
And then where and what time do you guys meet?
So we meet on Sunday mornings at 9, 10:30, and 12 every Sunday.
All right. That's the clip. Boom. So here's a marketing lesson for everyone watching, listening at home. Make your ads not look like ads. Podcast clips perform really, really well.
Yeah.
And I'm going to take some of the things that my friend Pradeepan here said, clip them up and use them as ads as well. So, man, thank you so much for taking time.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for doing what you're doing. It's really making a difference for a lot of people who don't feel like they have the tools and the skills to manage algorithms and keep up with all the trends. And so you're really helping people be witnesses and plant seeds. And I really don't think we need to judge ourselves by the harvest. God brings the increase, but we can be accountable for how many seeds that we had that we didn't plant. And so you're helping us plant seeds in our area. And you're doing a great thing. And so we're praying for you guys.
Amen, man. I receive it. I appreciate it. Yeah. And that's going to do it for this episode. We'll link to all of Pradeepan's info down below, his Instagram. You guys go follow him, follow Kalos, and keep up with what they're doing.